Sheila Weinberg, thanks for joining us on the All Night Channel. So great to be able to interview you now from Springfield while you were in Chicago. We've talked many times over the past, but always we had to get together in person. And so with the magic of technology, we can get together on camera while you were still back in your office in Chicago. We recently had the governor on the All Night Channel. We televised his signing of his budget, and he mentioned at the time why he thought it was so important for him to have a constitutional amendment that will change our income tax from a flat tax to a graduated tax. Let's start with the governor's comments at first, and then I'll ask you for your comments coming out of that.
The fair tax is necessary to ensure that we move toward permanently balancing our budgets. Opponents won't tell you that they would make us choose between much worse alternatives. They would substantially cut the very things that make us strong: education, public safety, childcare, and services for veterans and our seniors. Or they would materially raise our flat income tax rate, forcing the middle class, those striving to get there, and everyone else to pay more, 20% more. Or we can reject their alternatives and instead choose the fair tax. In signing this budget and the fair tax legislation today, I choose fiscal responsibility and fairness.
So, Sheila, that was the governor's comments, and I didn't know if you had any reactions.
The governor's talking about fiscal responsibility, which is a great goal to have, just like the Republicans have done and the Democrats down in Springfield. They just don't know how to count when they calculate a balanced budget. And this has gotten us $216 billion in the hole. And this budget, although the media reports, and the governor and the Democrats have said that it is balanced, it is far from balanced.
And when you say it is far from balance, what is it that you are having a problem with as far as the governor saying that it is balanced?
Well, Terry, as you know, noted in the Sun Times, if you can pull up that graphic, that would be awesome. It says that the state plans to make the $8.4 billion payment. The Democrats note that the state has made its pension payments for 7 years in a row. That's the longest period of consistent obligation payments in contemporary history. So they're saying that the budget is balanced because they are making the full $8.4 billion pension payment. The problem with that is that pension payment is based upon a schedule that was set up in 1994 by the Edgar administration to fund the pensions over 50 years. The problem is that the SEC determined that this plan, in essence, it's a pension scheme to fund the pensions over the next 50 years, is so out of balance and so out of whack that when the state included the comment that, hey, this funds our pensions over the next 50 years, the SEC charged the state with securities fraud. And we can see this SEC's work. It says the SEC Commission today charged the state of Illinois with securities fraud for misleading municipal bond investors about the state's approach to fund the pension obligation. And that the SEC further said that the amount that's being paid, you'll notice, through the statutory plan structurally underfunds the pension obligations and backloads the majority of the pension contributions far into the future. The structure imposed significantly stress on pension system and the state's ability to meet the competing obligation, a condition that has worsened over time. In the current budget, where they're saying they're fully funding the pension payments, $8.4 billion, that is based upon that statutorily plan that the SEC said was so misleading that they couldn't mention that plan in their bond offerings because it misled investors. But that is what the Democrats and the governor are saying, that the plan is fully funded. Now, to get the truth, because remember, the SEC said in their bond offerings, the state can't mislead the bond. So in the bond offering, they have to be truthful. So if we take a look at the state's most recent general obligation bond, that was done on April 2019. We will find wording in there about what happens with this pension, these pension payments. Do you have where it talks later in that document, Terry? So then what, again, this is a state document, and they have to be truthful to the bond people who might buy the bonds. And so in the state document where they have to be more truthful, it says that, remember, we have to look back and say, remember, the Senate Democrats said that the payments over the last 8 years had fully funded the pensions. Now, but if you look at the state's bond offerings, it says over the past 10 years, the funding levels of the state's retirement system have deteriorated dramatically and are among the lowest in the nations with respect to the state plan. The state contributions to the retirement system, while in conformity with state law, have been less than the contributions necessary to fully fund the retirement system as calculated by the actuaries. So again, what's going on is, yes, the $8.4 trillion that the Senate Democrats and the governor have chosen to pay into the pension plan is less than what the actuaries say they should fund. So if you will, let's take this down to a personal level. Let's say that I decided that I realized I had pension debt. So I set up a schedule of I'm going to put in $100 every month to pay my credit cards. Well, the credit card company says that my minimum payments should be $250. Well, I've decided I'm only going to pay $100. And so every time I pay $100, according to my schedule, I'm going to say that I have fully funded my credit card debt. But the credit card company says my minimum payment should be $250. So in relation to the state has decided that they should fund $8.4 billion. But the state's actuaries say that they should fund $13.3 billion. So they are actually underfunding their pensions by $4.9 billion. And to make matters worse, they're handling their retiree health care benefits on a pay-as-you-go basis. So they should be putting about $2 billion aside every year to properly the retirement benefits, which right now money is set aside on those benefits. They have promised the state workers and teachers those benefits, but they don't have any money set aside to fund those. So the Democrats said that the budget is balanced, but find at least $6 billion out of balance if you consider here's what the state pension actuaries say should be funded, and here's how much the state is funding, and here is how much should be funded for the retiree health care benefits. So instead of this $150 million surplus, the budget is really out of whack by more than $6 billion.
And in essence, if we were spending that money, that $6 billion, then we might truly be getting ahead of the game. But we're not, because as you just laid out in great detail, that the fact is we're we're only making the required payment, but that required payment is insufficient to be getting the state ahead and getting caught up on the unfunded liabilities.
It is the required payment that the state, the governor and legislators decided is the required payment.
Right, not an
According to
actuarially accounting.
Not an actuary. And again, the SEC is protecting potential bondholders by saying statutorily required portion that their legislature are currently funding is so out of whack, you cannot talk in the bond offerings. But who is protecting the taxpayers from this rhetoric that the pensions are fully funded? Their bond documents say that it's not fully funded, but they can be less than honest in their rhetoric around the budget, but they can't be less than honest in the bond offerings. And I've noticed that, yes, in this, we quoted the Sun Times. I've noticed I haven't read all of the media in Illinois, but the media I've read have talked about how, yes, this budget is balanced, and it's balanced because they're fully funding this pension. None of the reporters are digging into the numbers and really looking at that. No, it's really not balanced.
Well, and the governor, just as a reminder, was going to underfund even the full payment. His intention was to undercut that payment by about $850 million until April came, and the state found out that it brought in about $1.5 billion more than they had been expecting in tax receipts. So when they reached that, had that 1.5 billion more than anticipated, the governor changed his mind and decided to at least make, at that point, the full statutorily required payment to the state's pension fund.
Yeah, again, but that still does not pay the minimum payments that it's not my calculations, it's the state pension plan's actuaries calculation says, here's what you really need to contribute, 13.3 billion versus 8.4 billion into the plan in order to properly fund it.
We should, which I didn't do before, we say you are the founder of Truth in Accounting. Tell us a bit about what is Truth in Accounting and why you started your organization and how it pertains to the conversation we're having about the state budget.
Well, Truth in Accounting, we started actually working on the federal side when we realized that when years ago, these were the good old, the federal government was saying that the federal budget was balanced. I looked into the numbers and realized it was only balanced based upon their wacko calculations. So I started Truth in Accounting. Once I realized that, and to me, this isn't a numbers game. It's an issue where citizens are being told information that is not accurate. But then they go ahead and make decisions based upon that wrong information. And so I think that our democracies or our representatives' forms of government are at stake because citizens are not being told the true financial of their governments. So how can we decide on a progressive income tax? How can we decide on how much we should spend if we really don't know the true financial condition of the government? And to make matters worse, the state of Illinois is not providing us with timely audited financial statements. Every single state has issued their June 30, 2018. I'm not talking June 30, 2019. I'm talking a year ago. Every other state has issued their financial statement for the last fiscal year. And the state of Illinois has not issued for almost at 300, within 65 days later. And it's very curious to me how you can budget without knowing, again, your financial condition. It would be kind of like me deciding on my budget without getting credit card statements for the last year. But then I'm going to decide how much I'm going to spend in the future and how much I'm going to raise taxes in the future when we don't have an audited financial statement. We need timely information, and citizens are not provided that.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, in fact, about, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on the progressive tax. I know you're more taking the role of an accountant, and as you just said, what are the real numbers and how, therefore, will we or should we make our decisions in a democracy based upon real accounting and not the phony baloney accounting that so often we get from not just the state of Illinois, but other governments.
Yeah, yeah, the state has a long-term cash shortfall, and they either, to fix that, I tell people they either need to bring more money in or take less money out. Now, we are in a representative form of government, so politicians can go ahead and, if you do not have a flat tax, politicians can go ahead and promise a selective group of voters or the majority of voters services and benefits and say, well, you don't need to pay for those as much as other people do. And as long as you provide the majority of people with the services and benefits and make the minority people pay for them, then you start destroying the fabric of a representative form of government.
As the state is moving, and the governor has made a series of changes, as probably most of our viewers are aware, he wants to have the what he calls the fair tax. I would call it the graduated income tax. And then he wants to increase fees across any number of different areas. He wants to have an expansion of casinos, all intended to bring in more money. If he gets his way, and he has gotten his way on a number of these things, we have to see what the voters do in November of 2020 and whether they decide to change the Constitution according to how the governor wants it changed. Have you been able to ascertain what impact that would have on getting Illinois the kind of revenues we need?
Well, one thing to look at is Rahm Emanuel, before he left office, talked about taxing retirement benefits for people who made more than $250,000. I think that was the number. It might have even been less. So that is not possible unless you have this change in tax policy. Right now, under the flat tax, they would not be able to tax retirement income for people who have a high retirement income. But once they pass this graduated tax, if they pass it, then again, they can go ahead and say, okay, people, even though you've planned your retirement, even though state workers, you have, right now, retirement income isn't taxed. Well, including pensions that state workers and teachers get. Well, with this non-flat tax, they can go again after selected groups and start taxing them. And I would be careful if I was a state worker or a teacher, and because they could go after your retirement income, where under the current system, they could not go after high earners and pension retirement income people.
Yeah, that's one thing that we haven't heard, but the governor and legislature could tax. Illinois is one of the few states that does not tax pensions, I should say, or retirement income. And so, as you say, they could change that. And I've heard some speculation that might bring in another $2 billion annually if that were the case. On the other hand, and someone said we should do that, and pointed out that it's not like everyone is flocking to Illinois who's retired because we don't tax retirement income. So,
right, yeah, you do have to look at when you start, taxing, different groups, you have to also look at the mobility of those groups. Is there or isn't there evidence, and I've heard things from both sides. Some people believe that there is no relation to people moving out of state in relation to tax and spending policy. And other people are adamantly say, hold it, we're losing population all the time. and our fiscal house isn't in order, and we find we have a sister website called statedatalab.org, which allows you to analyze all 50 states on 300 data points. One of those data points is the United Van Lines Moving Index. And what we find is that states that are in worse financial situation, like Illinois, are losing residents. Well, if you add a graduated income tax, will that help the situation, or will it hurt the situation? And we don't have I don't have the evidence to that.
And to your credit, you don't just issue unfounded ideas. I mean, you try to go by the data and analyze it, and then make a decision based upon that. Have you looked at the impact of those states that have a progressive income tax? And I believe the majority do. I believe 34, if I'm right. I may not be right, but have you looked at those states that have a progressive income tax and whether or not they get more revenue coming in than the states with a flat income tax?
I think the issue is that states are all different, and I have not specifically looked at that data point. One thing that we do propose is what we call fact-based budgeting, that, by its name, we should use the facts when we budget. It's an acronym for full accrual calculations and techniques. Let's go ahead and include all of the costs related to the budget, not just not just the pension contribution we want to. Let's include the actuarially determined cost of these pensions and people's salaries. Let's not do things like in the past where we have borrowed money to balance the budget. Let's not do things like we've done in the past where we, to balance the budget, we just don't pay our bills, and that's why we have $6 to $8 billion of unpaid bills. So let's institute a fact-based budgeting calculations. So when the governor comes out and says, we have balanced the budget, they have really balanced the budget. Because again, I think that our democracies are at stake because, for years they have told us that the budget has been balanced. But if you look on our statedatalab.org and you click on Illinois, you will see that the state is $216 billion in the hole. So how could we have had a balanced budget for all of these decades and be $216 billion in the hole? And it's because they use political math to calculate the budget. Now, they told voters and taxpayers that the budget was balanced. People went to the voting booths going, oh, well, we must be living within our means because they've told us that the budget has been balanced. But what if in the past we would have had to really balance the budget and raise taxes in the past or cut spending in services or benefits? Would those incumbents gotten reelected? We never know. But because these politicians use this balanced budget rhetoric, which is false, citizens don't have the information that they need to be knowledgeable participants in their government. They don't have the information they need to know whether we do need a progressive income tax or not. Who knows? We don't have a latest financial report. They're telling us the budget's balanced. And instead of highlighting that, we really are $216 billion in the hole.
Yeah, we just put up the website for State Data Labs, and that's where people can go and do their own analysis based upon the data that you've gathered on a pretty interesting website that the Illinois Channel has looked at in the past. So we would encourage people to do that, and it helps them kind of be educated on some of these differences. As far as any of the other policy prescriptions that the governor has come out with, I don't know if you had an opinion on any of these, such as the expansion of casino gambling, and people say, well, you go over to Indiana and it's filled with Illinois license plates. We ought to be keeping the money in here. I know that's not necessarily in the sweet spot of what you focus on, but just in case you wanted to comment on some of these other issues.
Yeah, and as as you mentioned, we do our best to stay out of policy decisions, except for let's get the accounting done on a timely, accurate number basis. Let's go ahead and do, but fact-based budgeting. Let's use the facts instead of the political math, and so the citizens again have the information they need to be knowledgeable participants in their governments.
A while back, I interviewed actually Leslie Munger when she was still comptroller, and you reminded me of the conversation by your comments when Leslie Munger said, our computers are now so out of date that by the time I get the results of what we did, it's 9 months old and it's no longer actionable. I know Governor Rauner was trying to improve those computer systems, but I'm not sure where we are. But that's probably something I would say you would suggest, that let's continue to update these computer systems so we can get a better handle just as a state on managing our own financial data.
Well, the rest of the states already have their financial report, audited financial report. Why is Illinois, so long? I think in our state datalab.org, you can see the timeliness of the report. I think the states they usually try to get them out within 180 days. We're almost double that amount right now. California just came out with theirs. So now Illinois, once again, is the latest state. And again, how can I set a budget? How could I personally, determine, how much spending I should have, how much should should I be paying in rent? Do I have enough money to go to the movies, to eat out? If I didn't get my credit card statements for months upon end, I couldn't. But somehow the state of Illinois can go ahead and pass a $49 billion budget without knowing their
I think it's closer to 40,
financial
isn't
condition.
it? About 40 billion.
40, yeah, $49 billion.
Well, I think
49
40 billion, but then we also passed the capital bill,
maybe that's where I'm getting the
which is
49.
around 45. So they increased spending. The capital bill, I should say for the viewers here, is over a period of 6 years. That does have bipartisan support, because a lot of people are saying we just haven't had a capital bill in 10 years, and a lot of things are falling apart.
But here's what happens, Terry. Here's what happens is what goes on is if I spend money to repair the roads on like an annual basis, let's go ahead and maintain them on an annual basis. So again, think of your household. It's like, oh, okay, well, the lights have gone out. I need to replace a light bulb. The plumbing is getting a little weird. I need to have the plumber come in. Let's just say I didn't, it's like, well, I'd rather go and buy my fancy shoes than to spend the money on those repairs. And so then what happens is my house becomes an absolute disaster. And then I have to put a lot of money into things that I could have easily done. The plumbing, if I fixed it earlier, wouldn't have been the disaster that has happened. The same thing goes on in the state. Instead of spending money on an annual basis to fix things, which means that they couldn't buy the shoes, they couldn't buy the services and benefits that people want, that are more sexy, provide, services for veterans, provide services for, the mentally ill, provide, just all the services that people would want and need. Some, the ones I mentioned are needed, but some of them are wanted. Instead of fixing the roads on an annual basis, they put it off until it's a disaster. And now we have to borrow money and we have to raise taxes in order to fix the roads, instead of putting the proper amount into the budget every single year. They just seem to, Illinois, the way they seem to work is on crisis instead of on good budgeting and planning ahead.
Let me ask a question, and we won't go on much longer here, but a question that often comes up relative to the pensions, and I meant to ask this a little earlier, was we hear people say, well, not everyone retires at the same time, so we don't have to get our pension funded to 100%. If we get it to be just 70% funded or 80%, that's more than adequate. Do you have an opinion on that?
I don't have an opinion. The Society of Actuaries have an opinion. The federal government has an opinion on that. The federal government does not. If a corporation's pension plans go below 80% funded, 80%, then the federal government steps in and says you need to create a plan to fund these, and you can offer any more future enhanced benefits, and you have to properly fund them according to what the actuaries say you should do. They actually make the corporation, if the plan is below 90% funded, they have to like come up with this plan, and if the plan goes below 80% funded, then they have to go ahead and implement that plan. So I would say, because keep in mind that the pension plans have a lot of pension assets in them. They're underfunded in Illinois by more than $100 billion, but they do have pension plan assets in those. And the state, those assets the state is anticipating will earn between 6.5%, 7.5%. Well, if they earn less, then they're going to have to fund, they're going to have to come up with that money to make up for the shortfall. But keep in mind, those pension plan assets right now have a lot of, the pension plan assets should be valued very high because we're in this recovery.
The stock market has been going up for,
it's been going
actually, I think it's
gangbusters.
this month, I believe, or maybe it's next month. We're going to set an all-time record for the expansion of the stock market without having a correction. And yet, if we can't do good in this environment, then when will we be doing good, right?
And if your pension plans, I would say that your pension plans at this point in time should be overfunded, because we're at a high, and then when, if a recession happens, then we would go back down to a low. They should actually be overfunded at this point in time. Instead, we're woefully underfunded.
We're woefully underfunded. When you were talking about the corporations at 90% or 80%, I think the teachers' retirement fund, I believe, is funded somewhere at about 40 or 45% of what they should have. So by comparison, woefully under. And by the way, the legislators' pension is down to about 15% or so of what they're supposed to have.
Yeah, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but and again, a very valuable service to your viewers is we have on our State Data Lab a tab for just pensions. And you can click on there and the most recent year, and it will tell you how much the state's pensions, what the funding ratio is. This idea that they should be, if they're 70% funded or 80% funded, the Society of Actuaries have said, no, they should be 100% funded. And again, by federal law, by federal law, the corporations have to fund. Remember, I told you that the state doesn't fund what the actuaries tell them they should fund? Well, by federal law, corporations have to fund what the actuaries tell them they have to fund. They need to fund it. But the state of Illinois and other governments, i.e. the city of Chicago, they just fund whatever they have decided to fund, not based upon what the actuaries say need to be funded. And yet they balance their budget, yet these unfunded pension liabilities keep on going up and up and up because, as the SEC said, they are really not balancing their budget. And if you are saying that, if you're saying that you are balancing your budgets by funding these pension contributions, you are misleading the people you're saying that to. But the SEC is protecting the potential bond holders We are trying to protect the taxpayers and citizens of Illinois by providing them with truthful information. We hope that the press, other press outlets, because what I've read in the press, all the people are saying, are going along with that the budget is balanced, and that, they're all saying the pension plans are fully funded, without looking at the detail that we have looked at, that they're really not fully funded. And we are disappointed with other media outlets who are out there just, repeating the rhetoric that these pension funds are fully funded while we balance the budget.
Yeah, and I don't want the viewers to think that we're doing this in any partisan manner. That's not the point of this, and it's not like we're attacking the governor or the Democratic majorities in the legislature. This has been a problem that has developed over decades, but on the other hand, it's a problem we have to face as a state, and we alluded to the fact, the city of Chicago's pensions are woefully underfunded. The Chicago public schools are woefully underfunded. Sheila and I have talked about that in a previous conversation. And Sheila, as we're, I think, running short of time, I don't want to keep you all day, but I appreciate this. But the fact as we move forward, the governor said he wants to tackle pensions. He was asked, what's your next big thing? He wants to tackle pensions. He wants to tackle the property tax issue that's impacting so many in the state. So as we go forward, we'd like to be able to touch base with you more frequently than we have in the past. And also now we have this new technology that allows us to do that. Before we close out, is there, I would encourage other journalists to contact Sheila. She's a great resource, and she can be reached through her website there at truthandaccounting.org. But you do reports on other states, you do reports on the federal government. Before we close out, do you have any other reports that are in the works now that we might look at coming out in the future?
Well, what we just issued, you can go on to our statedatalab.org website. We just issued what we call the combined taxpayers burden. So what we did is we looked at the 10 most populated cities, including the city of Chicago, and calculated that if I'm a taxpayer in the city of Chicago, yes, I owe $30,000 is my share of the city's debt, but then that doesn't include the school district's debt. It doesn't include Cook County's debt, which I'm going to have to pay for, and it doesn't include like the CTA or the Park District or the state of Illinois. So if you add up, if you combine all of those taxpayer burdens, that's $119,000 that each taxpayer in the city of Chicago is going to have to pay to cover bills that have already happened. These are services and benefits that have already been promised, have already been incurred. They're going to pay $119,000 and not receive any government services or benefits for those in the future. So you can find that. We are currently working on our financial state of the states again. As I say, we really don't even know what we're going to do because Illinois hasn't come out with their numbers and we're almost done with our research. Are we going to have to use prior year's numbers? But that'll be out in September, and hopefully we'll have more recent numbers for Illinois, but cross our fingers they'll get that financial report out, but we're not sure. So we do the 75 most populated cities financial state, including the city of Chicago, the 50 states, and then this combined taxpayers. And then also we have gotten more engaged at the federal level to issue a financial state of the union, because we find it very unusual that the president will mention that he'll have the State of the Union, which does not include the financial State of the Union. So we're encouraging him to do that by issuing the financial State of the Union before he does his address.
Well, Sheila, we always appreciate you taking the time, and thanks to the viewers as well. We'll follow up with you as developments warrant. In the meantime, have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon.